You were told giving to a beggar is always light. But what if something else is happening in the unseen? What if generosity, when done blindly, opens doors you never intended to touch? I'm not guessing. I lived inside the occult system. I watched what followed the money after it left your hand. Tonight, a hidden spiritual mechanism is being exposed. I need you to understand something immediately. Money is never neutral in the spiritual realm. Every transfer carries intention, authority, and alignment. When your hand opens, something else opens with it. I didn't learn this in a church. I learned it inside rituals, inside contracts, inside systems built to harvest spiritual permission from unsuspecting people like you. When you give money to a street beggar, the physical act looks simple. A hand reaches out. Another hand responds. But in the unseen, a transaction has just occurred. Not every beggar is what they appear to be. Some are victims, some are broken, but some are positioned. You were taught that intention is all that matters. That is only half true. In spiritual warfare, alignment matters more than intention. I watched occult networks use poverty as camouflage. Not every individual knew they were part of it. But the system knew. Here is the secret they never tell you. When money is given without spiritual discernment, it can be claimed as consent. Consent to what? To influence, to attachment, to access. You think you gave charity. The system reads it as permission. I have seen rituals where no altar was present, no candles, no chants, just money collected from strangers, given freely, given emotionally, given without authority. That money was later dedicated, not by you, but in your name. You never stood in the circle, but your provision did. This is why some people feel drained after doing good. You feel heavy, irritated, confused, spiritually foggy. You say, but I was helping. Yes, but help without covering is exposure. Let me make this clear. True. Compassion never weakens you. If giving leaves you spiritually empty, something else fed. I watched how beggars were coached. Not all, but enough to reveal the pattern. Certain phrases trigger emotional bypass. Certain looks invite pity instead of discernment. Certain locations are chosen for energetic traffic. Busy intersection, hospital gates, religious sites. Why? Because people there are emotionally open. And emotional openness lowers spiritual defenses. This is where the agreement happens. Not spoken, but accepted. You respond out of guilt instead of guidance, out of fear instead of faith, out of pressure instead of peace. And pressure is never from God. I have seen money given by believers later used in rituals to invoke delay. Delay in finances. Delay in clarity, delay in favor, not because God punished them, but because they unknowingly empowered something else. Here is a truth that will shock you. The enemy does not need your worship. He needs your permission. And permission often comes disguised as kindness without wisdom. I am not telling you to harden your heart. I am telling you to guard your authority. There is a difference. Jesus never gave blindly. He gave intentionally. He discerned spirits before he released power. You were never meant to give from emotional manipulation. You were meant to give from spiritual command. Some of you are wondering why financial leaks keep happening. Why money enters and disappears. Why generosity never seems to return multiplied. This is one of the doors. When money leaves your hand without prayer, without direction, without authority, It becomes undefined. Undefined resources are claimable resources. In the occult, undefined offerings are considered open access. I know this because I participated in it. I saw the ledgers. I heard the language. They called it harvest by compassion. And here is the most dangerous part. Once an attachment forms, it doesn't stay at money. It moves to thoughts, dreams, decisions. Suddenly, you feel discouraged for no reason. Suddenly, generosity feels heavy instead of joyful. Suddenly, you question your purpose. That is not coincidence. That is residue. You were never meant to carry residue from giving. True giving produces peace, clarity, strength. If you've experienced the opposite, this message is not random. It is exposure. I am not saying every beggar is a trap. I am saying every act of giving must be governed. Governed by prayer, governed by discernment, governed by authority. If you don't decide where your money goes spiritually, something else will. This is why some people give directly into ministries, food programs, or acts they can cover in prayer. It is not about control. It is about protection. You are not stingy for being discerning. You are responsible. And responsibility is spiritual maturity. In the next point, I will expose how emotional guilt is weaponized to bypass your spiritual authority, and why feeling sorry is not a license to give. You must hear this carefully. Guilt is not humility. Guilt is not compassion. And guilt is never a voice you should obey. In spiritual warfare, guilt is one of the most effective weapons used against believers. Not fear, not hatred. Guilt, because guilt bypasses discernment. I watched this strategy perfected, not in theory, in practice. People think manipulation requires force. It doesn't. It requires emotion. When guilt is activated, authority shuts down. You stop asking questions. You stop listening inwardly. You stop checking alignment. You act fast just to silence the discomfort inside you. And that discomfort is engineered. I saw how emotional scripts were taught. Again, not every person knew. But the system did. Children were used strategically. Visible wounds, crutches, religious phrases, familiar words meant to disarm you. God bless you, pray for me, help me for God's sake. Those words are not accidental. They are keys. They create spiritual pressure. Pressure forces rushed decisions. Rushed decisions create unguarded openings. And openings are access points. Here is the truth most people never confront. When you give because you feel bad, you are not giving in faith. You are giving to escape discomfort. Faith releases peace. Guilt demands relief. The occult understands this difference very well. I sat in rooms where they study human response patterns. They mapped which emotions produced the fastest compliance. Fear was unreliable. Anger was risky. But guilt worked almost every time. Because guilt makes good people override wisdom. Let me expose something deeper. When you give under guilt, you are subconsciously saying, I am responsible for fixing this. That statement matters. Because responsibility equals authority. And authority, when claimed wrongly, creates spiritual entanglement. You were never called to carry responsibility for every broken situation you encounter. You were called to obey direction. Direction comes from God. Guilt comes from pressure. Pressure never comes from God. Some of you replay moments in your mind. You didn't want to give. You felt uneasy. But you gave anyway just to stop the internal conflict. And afterward, you felt drained. That was not generosity. That was extraction. Extraction happens when something pulls from you without replenishing you. God's system never extracts. It multiplies. The enemy's system always extracts, then returns nothing. This is why some people feel financially blocked despite being generous. Their giving is frequent but misaligned. Misaligned giving does not produce harvest. It produces leakage. I witnessed something chilling. Money given in guilt was considered unclaimed authority. It was treated differently than money given in faith. It was easier to dedicate, easier to attach to, easier to redirect spiritually, because the giver never established boundaries. Boundaries are spiritual law. When you give without boundaries, you are saying, anyone can define this. Act, and someone will. This is why discernment is not cruelty. Discernment is stewardship. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to pray silently. You are allowed to say no. No is not rejection. No is protection. Jesus said no many times. He walked past needs he did not address, not because he lacked compassion, but because he followed instruction. If Jesus did not respond to every demand, why do you feel required to? That pressure is not holy. Here is another truth. Some beggars are spiritually oppressed. Giving money does not free them. It sustains the cycle. Freedom requires intervention, not impulse. And when you give without wisdom, you sometimes strengthen the very bondage you feel sorry for. That is painful to hear, but it is real. The enemy loves emotional giving because it keeps both sides trapped. The giver leaks. The receiver stays bound. Nobody wins except the system behind it. This is why prayer-led giving breaks chains. It either redirects your generosity or blocks the transaction altogether. If you feel sudden heaviness when you see someone asking for money, pause. That heaviness is not compassion. It is warning. Compassion feels clear. Heavy emotions feel urgent and confusing. God does not rush you. Manipulation does. Some of you are realizing now why certain encounters lingered in your spirit, why certain faces stayed in your dreams, why certain moments felt off. Those were not random. They were moments where guilt attempted to override authority. And you are being taught now, so it never happens again. In the next point, I will expose what actually happens to money after it leaves your hand and how spiritual dedication works without your knowledge. Once the money leaves your hand, your influence does not automatically follow it. This is the part nobody talks about. This is where most people lose authority. In the physical world, the transaction is over. In the spiritual world, it has just begun. Money carries assignment. If you do not assign it, something else will. I witnessed this process repeatedly, quietly, methodically, without drama, no fire, no screaming, no obvious ritual. Just redirection. Money collected from the streets was often gathered together later, separated, categorized, not by amount, by source. Money from believers was marked differently because it carried potential. Potential is valuable in the unseen. That money had passed through hands, governed by faith, even if the faith was not engaged properly. That made it usable. Here is the part that will unsettle you. Spiritual dedication does not require your presence. It only requires access. Once access exists, intention can be imposed. I saw money laid out on tables with nothing written on it. No names, no labels. But the language spoken over it mattered. Words define ownership. Words define direction. If you never define the direction of your giving, someone else can attempt to. This is why prayer before giving is not religious habit. It is legal protection. When you pray, you mark the transaction. You seal it. You govern it. Without that, your money becomes open source in the spiritual realm. I am not exaggerating. This is how the system works. Some money was used to sustain addiction, some to reinforce cycles of dependency, some to empower spiritual resistance. And the giver never knew. They wondered why their prayers felt delayed, why generosity no longer felt joyful, why something felt blocked. They were feeling the echo of misdirected authority. Here is another truth. Money is a servant, but it listens to whoever speaks last with authority. If the last authoritative words spoken over that money were not yours, then it is no longer operating under your alignment. This is why silent giving without inner confirmation is dangerous. Silence is not neutrality. Silence is vacancy. Vacancy invites occupation. Some of you have felt this and couldn't explain it. You gave, but afterward, you felt exposed, almost like something followed you home. That sensation is real. Not because the person had power over you, but because the transaction was unguarded. Ungoverned transactions create spiritual trails. Those trails are not permanent, but they are real. This is why some people experience sudden financial confusion after certain encounters. Unexpected expenses, broken plans, strange resistance. It is not punishment. It is interference. Interference happens when lines are crossed without boundaries. You must understand this clearly. God does not oppose generosity. He opposes disorder. Disorder creates access points. Order creates protection. The enemy thrives in disorder. This is why structured giving is powerful. Giving that is intentional, directed, covered. When you give into a place where prayer, accountability, and purpose exist, your authority remains intact. When you give randomly under pressure, authority fragments. Fragmented authority leaks. I want you to hear this. You are not responsible for fixing poverty. You are responsible for obeying direction. Obedience keeps authority whole. Some of you have been blaming yourselves, thinking you were too soft or too emotional. That is not the issue. The issue was lack of teaching. You were never taught that generosity is a weapon, and every weapon needs training. Untrained weapons hurt the user. Trained weapons bring victory. In the occult, they understand this principle perfectly. That is why they never release resources without intention. They know intention defines outcome. Believers are generous but often uninformed. And ignorance is the enemy's favorite advantage. But that advantage ends here, because once you know, you cannot be exploited the same way again. In the final point, I will show you how to give safely, powerfully, and without fear, how to shut every door while keeping your heart clean. Authority restored. Now listen carefully. This is where everything changes. You were never meant to stop giving. You were meant to start governing. The solution is not a closed hand. The solution is a commanded hand. When I left the occult, this was one of the hardest truths to accept. The enemy does not fear generosity. He fears disciplined generosity. Because disciplined generosity carries authority he cannot hijack. Here is the first principle you must adopt immediately. Never give from pressure. Ever. Pressure is a spiritual red flag. When God leads you to give, there is clarity, even when it costs you, even when it stretches you. There is peace. Peace is the signature of divine instruction. If there is chaos in your emotions, pause. Pausing is not disobedience. Pausing is wisdom. You are allowed to say, "Let me pray," even silently, even for 2 seconds. Those 2 seconds restore jurisdiction. The moment you acknowledge God before giving, authority re-enters the transaction. Here is the second principle. Always assign your giving. Before money leaves your hand, define it. You don't need a long prayer. You need clear authority. God, I release this under your covering. God, if this is not aligned, block it. God, let this produce light only. That assignment seals the resource. Once sealed, it cannot be redirected. I have watched attempted dedications fail because the giver had already governed the transaction. Words spoken in faith override words spoken in darkness. Always. The enemy cannot override sealed authority. Third principle. Understand this clearly. You are not obligated to give to every person, but you are obligated to remain obedient. Obedience sometimes means giving food instead of money. Sometimes it means directing someone to help instead of becoming the help. And sometimes it means walking away. Walking away does not make you heartless. It makes you covered. Jesus walked away from crowds, from demands, from pressure, and he never lost compassion. He protected his assignment. You must protect yours. Fourth principle. If you feel called to help someone consistently, bring structure into it. Structure kills exploitation. Unstructured help creates dependency. Structured help creates empowerment. This is why programs, ministries, and accountable systems are powerful. They don't just give, they govern. Governance breaks cycles. The enemy feeds on cycles. God breaks them. Fifth principle, and this one is critical. Never allow shame to guide your generosity. Shame says, if I don't give, I'm bad. Truth says, if I don't obey, I'm misaligned. You answer to God, not to emotional pressure. And here is the restoration many of you need to hear. If you have given wrongly in the past, you are not cursed. You are not marked. You are not trapped. Authority can be reclaimed right now. You can pray and revoke any misalignment. You can declare that every resource you released without wisdom is now cleansed under God's authority. Darkness does not own you because of ignorance. Ignorance is removed by revelation, and revelation has come. From this moment forward, your generosity becomes dangerous to the enemy, because now it is intentional, protected, directed. Now when you give, chains break, not authority leaks. Now when you give, peace follows you home, not heaviness. Now when you give, heaven backs the transaction. This is how it was always meant to be. You don't stop being compassionate. You become powerful. You don't close your heart. You fortify it. And from this place, generosity becomes a weapon of light that cannot be twisted, stolen, or reversed. You are no longer ignorant. You are no longer exposed. Your generosity is now covered with authority. What once leaked will now multiply. What once drained you will now strengthen you. Walk in discernment without fear. You give now as one who governs, and nothing can steal that power.